Good afternoon. This is Seraphim Hanish, American in Exile. During this report, we will try to present a little bit about life in Russia, and I will also offer some commentary and some thoughts about some of the major stories that went on this week, both here in Russia, where that applies, and around the world, where that applies, especially with the United States. So, Russia, life in Russia. Well, you've seen my neighborhood before. You can see it again now. This is the Tsaritsino Mikrorayon. In other words, the micro district of Tsaritsino. There's a large park here where there is a palace for the Tsar that was actually not completed until around 2007. It was partially constructed before the revolution, then it stopped, and then after communism fell, I guess, this is not a very precise historical account, of course, but apparently in 2007, somebody thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and finish the palace. So it's finished. It's about a 30-minute or 25-minute walk from here. Very beautiful. I have some pictures of it that I will include in this video so you can see it. And it is a typical, very Russian experience. There is a large palace, and there is a church next to it, and then the whole area is the Tsaritsino Nature Park and Reserve. Very, very nice place to go. People often go to this park after getting married because it is extremely picturesque. Everything is really well groomed. In fact, you're not even really allowed to play on the grass in many places. So it's an extraordinarily great place to take photographs and do all the wedding stuff, where the bride gets to pick out all the places she wants to have pictures taken of her, and the groom just follows along, right? You all know that. I did it when I got married. Thankfully, not to a tremendously grand extent, but you can't get away with doing nothing, not when you're not living alone anymore. So, let's see. So, as it turned out, I was in a church this week near the center of Moscow, and I had a chance to consider going to Red Square after the service was over. After the attack on the Senate building a couple of weeks ago, the word had gone around that Red Square was closed. So, since I was so close, I wanted to just go see if it was still closed. And it wasn't. And what you see now are pictures and video that I took from walking around Red Square, and some things were very, very surprising. One was this: if you look at the way the square is laid out, it's very large, and it is a rectangle. It doesn't look like it's a regular shape, but it really is pretty regular. The Kremlin is on one side, and then on the other side there is what we call GUM. During the Soviet era, this was referred to as the world's largest department store, which is, I can't speak to what it was in the Soviet time, but what it is now is an extraordinarily high-class shopping mall with many, many stores on at least 3 levels, and 3 entire buildings of 3 levels at least apiece that have all kinds of things. You can shop the world in this place. Even now, you can find all kinds of stuff. The highest of high fashion, probably technology, and to some degree, and some really interesting things. You just got to have money if you want to actually buy anything. But this is where people that have money go to buy it, among other places. So, but one of the things that I noticed kind of made me laugh, because no doubt everybody watching this is familiar with Lenin to some degree, or familiar with the fact that Lenin's tomb is on Red Square, which it is. It still is there. And, you know, there is always a bit of a kerfluffle about this, especially among Orthodox Christian believers who are very interested in getting rid of the vestiges of communism. And they say that, you see, the thing with Vladimir Lenin is that his remains are preserved and preserved and preserved and preserved and preserved because the Soviet state was trying to kind of show him in the same manner as the saints. Some of you may not know this, but in the Orthodox Christian tradition, as well as the Roman Catholic tradition, it is considered a sign of somebody's holiness, sainthood, when after they die for some number of years, sometimes a great number of years, their body does not decay. Oftentimes this has happened where people that lived holy lives have been exhumed, and not to get into the whole process too much here, that might be another video in itself. But instead of the body being foul or disintegrated or anything like that, it's intact completely, and sometimes has a very wonderful aroma. Roses is often reported, roses and honey and stuff like this. So it is because of this tradition that when Vladimir Lenin died, they put him in a tomb, and the efforts were made to keep his body from decaying. And those efforts actually continue until this day. They still keep his body from decaying, even though communism is quite long gone. Communism fell in 1991, but even in 2023, it kind of got to the point where there was tradition already built up around this. There's an historical tradition. There are still people that are dedicated communists in Russia that believe that the fall of the communist system was a tragedy, and who miss it. And there is, for a while the Communist Party was actually forbidden when Russia reconstituted itself, but now it is allowed again, and oddly enough, the leader of the party is an Orthodox Christian. So the party's point of view is somewhat modified, at least at the introductory level. It is somewhat modified from what it was historically. So anyway, Lenin's tomb is still there. It is kind of entertaining because now when we have Victory Day parades, one of the things that I often notice, especially in recent years, is that the grandstand and the associated structures that are put around it tend to cover Lenin's tomb and obscure it from the public view. This is very interesting. Well, what I saw the other day was even more interesting, and that is that even on the shopping center, facing into the square, at the shopping center's main entrances, there are icons of the Holy Mother of God, Virgin Mary, we call her Theotokos or Bogorodice, and of Christ. I found a saint, I believe it was Andre or Alexei, I have to check. You may see it accurately written in the text when you see this part of the video. And there are probably other icons. And so on the other side, in the Kremlin gates, the Nikolsky gate has an icon of St. Nicholas with a sword. That's been there forever. I don't think that was taken down during the Soviet period, but I could be wrong. And there's an icon of Christ, also the Transfiguration, Preobrazhensky or Transfiguration Gate, and the gates that lead into Red Square from the nearby Otkhodnyrad metro station. This is called the Resurrection Gate, and there is a small chapel built into the structure where the gates are. And then when you walk through those gates, the first thing you see on your left is the reproduced, rebuilt Church of the Kazan icon of the Mother of God. So the Khmelnitskiy church is on one side of Red Square. A very famous and well-known Church of the Protection of the Mother of God on the Moat, otherwise known as St. Basil's, is on the other side of Red Square. And so Mr. Lenin he's got icons, Christian icons, facing him from all sides. And I thought that was pretty entertaining. I said, I guess that kind of takes care of that. Now, interestingly enough, there is a move or a wish by many clergy, and I share this idea that Lenin should be thrown outside the city and allowed to disintegrate, and that it's very strange to keep doing this practice with somebody who is largely responsible for some of the horrific pogroms that were carried out against so many Russian people and so many Soviet people over the years, especially Orthodox Christians. But I think the current idea is that maybe he will get removed when everybody who was his fan finishes dying out. I don't know. I suspect it's going to have to be revisited and revisited and revisited until finally somebody decides that it's time to do this. So that's an interesting thing that I saw this week. So let's talk about some news. This week was a huge news week. And each day since my last report, I noticed I kept saying, I'm going to have to write this stuff down because there are so many stories, and big ones too, happening that I'm not going to be able to track them all by the time it comes for me to do my Friday broadcast. And so here it is, my time for my Friday broadcast, and I had to write everything I could think of and then go through my view list in YouTube to see what I had been watching to try to remind myself. It was a busy week. Let me list to you the topics that I wrote down, that all of which just happened in this week. We had the Durham report drop. We had Ron DeSantis in a very clumsy initiation to his presidential campaign. We had the victory of the Russian forces, Wagner group, in Bakhmut, and the present situation where Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner group are swapping out, and other people are coming in from the Donetsk militia and the regular Russian army to hold Bakhmut and to extend their advances into the rest of the claimed new territories. There is the continuing saga of Bud Light, and this, most interestingly, in the last day or two, was augmented by this awful thing with Target, a very prominent sort of, I don't know what you call it. I've always considered Target to be the last place I would want to go to buy anything, and not because of their Pride Week stuff, but just because it's just boring presentation. I've gone in there and never really found anything I wanted. But their attempt to promote everything perverted and transgender and gay and even Satanist to children in their yearly run-up to June, which is, they call it Pride Month, but let's be specific about the title. It is really Gay Pride Month. They somehow mysteriously dropped the word gay so that nobody would think about it. What other stories were there? There was the overall rejection of God that we see manifest with a warning from Franklin Graham. That was very noteworthy. There is the fact now that since the fall of Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces have been launching incursions into traditionally understood Russian territory, not the new territories, with U.S. weapons, when the United States said that they would never allow their weapons and equipment to be used directly against Russia or on Russia's territory. Well, it is now. Let's see, so we have that. We have very recent, what I heard today, that Recep Erdogan, the president of Turkey, who is getting ready to participate in his own runoff election next few days, well, Zelensky kind of went on his SHIT list because Zelensky, Ukrainian forces started poking around the Turk Stream pipeline, which transfers gas from Russia through Ukraine to Turkey and to some parts of southeastern Europe. So that didn't go over very well. We have the whistleblowers for the Russiagate controversy. And we have Chris Pratt doing a very anti-woke, very pro-Christian point of view in some of his short videos on YouTube speaking. And we finally have kind of a flashback. Yevgeny Prigozhin and his very interesting address to the world, and particularly to Zelensky and to the Ukrainian armed forces in regards to the Wagner's victory or the Ukrainian loss in Bakhmut. So we have many stories. So I'm going to pick out a couple of these. First, let's talk about the Durham report. So John Durham did a 4-year investigation into the whole Russiagate investigation itself. So it's the investigation of the investigation. And of course, investigations were the big hallmark in President Trump's time in office. This notion that Vladimir Putin did something to either intimidate Trump or to help put him in office. And both stories were floating around, but it just kind of depended on which narrative one wanted to pick that day. And so John Durham launched a report after the Mueller investigation came up dry, showing that there was no evidence of any kind of collusion with Russian government authorities of any type. But the thing that happened was that the Durham report took 4 years to produce, and now that it got released, its effect is basically nothing. Some reporting in CNN simply dismissed it as being flawed and incorrect, but some other reporting was just kind of like, yeah, look, it's a bombshell. Look, we're vindicated. Trump is vindicated. But where is the real vindication? You know, this whole thing crippled President Trump's term. Even as successful as it was, he could have gotten so much done. And as a matter of fact, one of the biggest pieces of damage that the Russiagate controversy produced was an inability to normalize American relations with Russia. Had that happened, we would not be dealing with this Ukraine conflict now. I mean, almost for certain. You know, so we have this situation where the report is out, and what do you do with it? Well, it's a big fat nothing at this point. So it seems like one of the comments I heard today was that, you know, they were slow walking, answering different things on the investigation. And I think this was with a different case, but it applies to the Durham stuff too. By refusing to answer in any timely fashion, you just get people sick of it, and then they drop it, and they don't care about it anymore, and it doesn't matter what the answer is. This really shows us, though, how unreliable government has become in the United States, how unreliable news media has become in the United States, because even if they tell you the truth, they tell it to you at a time and in a way where it will fall on deaf ears and it won't make any difference. Now, that is not the only kind of thing that is happening. Some things are moving much faster. So let's take a look at Target. And let's talk about the Bud Light thing. Now, the whole controversy is, well, we've got to talk about it as adults. The controversy is kind of about sex. And why? Why is the controversy about sex? Well, any number of reasons, but generally one is that people are interested in sex. Yet, the recent issue of transgender stuff is very peculiar. So, first we have this really strange story about this Dylan Mulvaney. It's a man who decided that he wanted to masquerade as a woman and do it for a whole year, call it 365 days of girlhood. Now, I am obviously not a girl, but I cannot understand why any woman would have any tolerance for this kind of nonsense. A man who is cross-dressing as a woman, talking about how wonderful it is to be a girl, how does that benefit a woman? How does it benefit a woman who is a sportswoman, if you will, who competes in an event, who is beaten by a man who is competing in women's sports under the fantasy that he is a woman, when he's not? He's a man. You can do whatever you want, but, man is a man is a man, a woman is a woman is a woman is a woman, and it doesn't matter what you do. You can throw chemicals in your body, you can chop things off, you can add things if you really want to, but it's not going to change a damn thing about who you are. Other than the only thing that it's going to do is increase your psychological and spiritual state of destruction, self-destruction in the worst way too. And I'm, during this video, I'm going to go a little bit theological because I think I really have to. Not because I'm trying to point out that, religion, is the thing is the treatment, because that's not really true. Religion is usually, when it's at its best, it is an attempt to explain reality. And there's no more accurate depiction of reality that I know of than ancient, what we call now Orthodox Christianity. It used to be Judaism before Christ came, but as an explanation for how things work and why things work in this creation, why they work in the way they do, the ability to kind of accept that things work in the way they do. These answers tend to be only in religious sources, theological sources, and nowhere else. Okay? Nowhere else. You can do philosophy if you want to, but it's not going to work. Because philosophy is somebody dreaming up some idea, and it's never enough. Well, so there were a few things that I noticed. One is, with all these people going around, all these men deciding that they're women, where are the women that are deciding to be men? Do you see them? I never hear about them, except for maybe the Tennessee shooter, apparently. In fact, the news media couldn't even get that story straight. Some people were saying it was a guy trying to be a girl. Others were saying it was a girl trying to be a guy. And I think that's where it kind of ended up, was that it was a girl trying to be a guy. So that one was really messed up. But generally speaking, it's always what we're presented with is men that are masquerading as women. And I think that's kind of skeevy, Let's put it this way. I always hear about, the funny thing is about men trying to get into the girls' dressing room, right? Teenage boys trying to get into the girls' locker room because they want to see something. But you never hear about girls trying to get into the guys' locker room because they want to see something. So I don't think it's the same. And when you have something like this where you've got somebody masquerading like they're a girl and talking about 365 days of girlhood, I think that just, the reaction was organic. And, it was a number 10 on the disgustometer. And so it was very predictable that beer drinkers all over America and probably all over the West and the world, people that like Bud Light see this and they're like, no way, I'm not, this is just nasty, it's weird, don't want any part of it. And so we see what's happening. It's a very successful economic action, not organized, it's very organic. It's just like, why would I want to participate in that? Well, now we got to look at this thing about Target and pride. So if you look at the graphics here, you notice that the display says show your pride, or different things, be proud, and the rainbows and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, there are definitely a couple of really good stories coverage, especially from Dr. Steve Turley, talking about how Target was employing a Satanist to do some clothing design. So not only were you getting things about promoting lesbianism and homosexuality, but you were getting stuff like Satan loves you and all this lumped in together. Of course, it's all the same. I see that, but again, I'm theologically educated, so I see how things align like this, but many people may not. If you don't, that's fine, but consider just the fact that these two things are being presented together in the same display. So Pride Week, feel proud about being queer, feel proud about being a lesbian, and feel proud about being a Satanist, all in the same point. I mean, I didn't make that up. That's what Target did. And thank God, some parents started seeing this, they parodied it, and then they went and really complained to Target. And now Target's on its heels, trying to hide the displays from prominence. They at least broke the contract with this satanic clothing designer. But, somebody thought it was a good idea, and they tried to market it. Now, I think it's a bit worse than just, the cynicism of people that are already involved in the homosexual lifestyle, that they say, okay, so the companies are doing Pride Month because they want to make some extra bucks. But this was promoted at children, at babies, toddlers. Okay, it's promoted at people that don't think about sex at all, really, and who have no need to think about sex at all in any way. So they're going after our children. And I am very gratified that there were a lot of parents that really stood up and said, this is not right. It is not right in the worst way. But I want to go a little further now. Let's talk about this. Notice that, as I mentioned earlier, the title of the month, as Target presents it, and as other people present it, is not Gay Pride Month or Homosexual Pride Month. It's just Pride Month. But the colors and the symbolism, like maybe somebody doesn't know what Pride Month is, and they might take it in a very neutral fashion. Oh, this is a month to be proud. Well, why? And they may not even think about it past that, may not even think about it that far. But that's kind of the whole trick. So let's think about something. Lest YouTube censor me for being very specific, let me just put it to you this way. What are they saying they should be proud about? Are they saying that they should be proud that a man goes where no man should ever go? In the words of Star Trek, where no man has gone before. Well, apparently a lot of them have gone there before, but where no man ought to go, where no woman ought to go. what are you proud of? Think about, for those of you who know what I'm talking about and know anything about physiology, why don't you think about the fact that they are saying we should be proud because we do this. This is what we do, and we should be proud of it, and you should be proud of it too. Well, if you think about it, and the whole premise is based on getting people not to, but if you think about what they are saying they should be proud of, I don't think it's very much a source of pride at all. I think it's horrifically disgusting. It is no mystery that a lot of homosexuals, especially men, commit suicide because they get caught up in the lifestyle. They are convinced that they have no choice but to stay in the lifestyle, and they can't get out of it, and they can't stand themselves for being in it. Also, is it any wonder, a lot of this stuff gets dressed up. Is it any wonder, for example, that when same-sex marriage in the United States was being promoted, almost all the imagery was two women being together, never two men. Why? Because if you start thinking about what they actually do, one situation is more physically disgusting than the other. Leave that to you to figure out. Let's see if YouTube leaves this video up because I'm saying things in this way. Anyway, the people that are caught up in that lifestyle, that's one thing. I had a family member who was caught up in it. I would have never known. I never knew that he was in it until after he had died. And his mother told me. So, there seems to be a sense of decency that has really gone away, where people are not only promoting but just flouting this, and especially in front of our children. What is the point of trying to get children to make any kind of assessment or judgment about sex or what sex they are? And I won't use the word gender. This is what I have to say about that word, gender. I teach English. That's the usual bread and butter kind of thing. I teach English, I edit English, all that kind of stuff. And I'm studying Russian slowly through experience. Gender is a term used to describe a type of word in terms of how that word ends and how you treat the word endings in different situations within the particular language that the word exists in. English does have masculine and feminine and neuter gender nouns. We generally don't think about it that way because we don't have masculine, feminine, and neuter gender articles or adjectives or other things like that, but we do have them. Other languages like Russian and Spanish and French and Italian and all those, and German, all do have movements with gender. And the gender is not reflective of sex, though oftentimes you may see that a masculine gender noun often has the image of something that might be considered strong, manly, masculine in some way, like a lion or a military aircraft carrier or something like that. In English, ships are called she, but in Russian, ships are called he, for example. That is their pronoun when referred to it, because you use pronouns to identify things, where in English you only use pronouns to identify the sex of people or animals whose sex you know, right? So gender, the whole idea of using the word gender is kind of a misleader, because it's the suggestion seems to be that you can be whatever gender you want regardless of your biological sex. Now, the problem with that in reality is that even if we were to say that there was a distinction between gender and sex, you can't split them. you can have a male who dresses like a woman, and what you have here is a neurotic man. Somebody who has spiritual and mental problems and who acts on those things by dressing as a woman, presumably because that makes him feel better in some way. And that is a sickness. That is wrong. The same as, trying not to be what you are in such a radical way is psychologically very damaging. And so what I think that real tragedy is when we start hearing stuff about, look, he shows so much courage by coming out as a woman, and really? You're just killing the guy by saying that. Or you're killing the girl, the woman who doesn't understand what they are and that they decide that they're something else, especially if they start doing physical things to try to make it so in a physiological manner to some extent. It's mutilation. It's mutilation on all levels. It's spiritual self-mutilation, psychological self-mutilation, and oftentimes now even physical self-mutilation. Just look around. So, very big tragedy. So anyway, what was really good was that a lot of parents still showed that they could be parents, and they started putting the force on Target to get rid of these displays, or at least, and Target complied at least enough to make them no longer prominent. And they did discontinue their contract with the satanic clothing designer. But we have to look at this kind of stuff. It is really an attack on who we are, families, and everything like that. Now, one way we could say is that it can't really last, because people who do that cannot reproduce, right? But they can adopt. And so I don't really think that that just saying, well, it's going to go away of its own accord, I don't think that's going to work. This has happened before. It happened in the Roman Empire. During its decadence, very similar things were taking place. Homosexuality was extraordinarily rampant, so much so that the first chapter in Romans, if you read the New Testament, Paul the Apostle talks about how it is that people became homosexual. He talks about it. He kind of goes down the list, and he talks about it. He says, God allows everybody to kind of believe in his own way, and these people started, they started according honor to earthly things rather than to the heavenly. And so they made themselves idols, statues to worship, fake gods, false gods. As they did this, they also started to degrade as people and to begin to actually feel passions. Men burned with lust for other men, doing that which is unseemly. And also, what it goes on to say is that as this was happening, God, in Paul's words, more or less, God abandons them to their own lusts. And in other words, it's like, well, once they've started, for Paul, it's God abandoning them. I don't know that it is necessarily God being mean and abandoning them. But when people start doing this kind of stuff, they cut themselves off from God, and it becomes very, very difficult to... You can't live close to any kind of real relationship with God and do these things at the same time. And usually the pathology goes, once you're started on this path, it gets worse and worse and worse. And the worse it gets, the more unable a person is to see that there is even a problem. And so that is where it goes, where it talks about people being backbiters, haters of God, delighting in every evil thing, and that God gives them up to their own desires, which in a sense he does. Although he often opens doors in those points for people that they might come to their senses and change it. It is also known that to do so is a very difficult process, and while it is possible, a lot of people opt out of life rather than repent, because it's easier to just think I am born this way and that I'm just going to die from this and that life is not worth anything, than it is to actually say, you know what, I've been doing some really embarrassing, disgusting stuff, and if I'm going to get right with my life, I guess the first thing I have to do is admit that and then stop doing it and You know, in Christianity, we talk about going to confession. You know, you have to talk about what you've been doing, get guidance, how to stop it, and so on. And for a lot of people, that's really hard. Think about alcoholics. You know, alcoholic may know he's an alcoholic, but stopping drinking involves doing a whole lot of things the alcoholic usually doesn't want to do. You know, namely to be honest, to be humble, to follow directions, and so on, to do what is necessary to be delivered from this helpless state of mind and body. So that's what we're seeing now. We are seeing people, the present day manifestations of the same old problem. And it's interesting that it's happening in the West, in the United States in particular, and in Canada, I would say. Now Europe is even worse, but I can't speak to a European situation at all because I've never really spent a significant time living in Europe. So somebody who lives in Europe would have to be the witness to that. I can say what I know from my experience in the U.S. and very little from what I know from my friends that are Canadian residents, citizens, or otherwise that have experience with Canada. So it's just the same thing. It's just the same thing. Rejection of God at some point has led to all of this. And that sounds like the forbidden thing to say on a video. It's especially if I'm, a person who talks about geopolitics and U.S. politics and different things like that. You're not supposed to break it down to religion, except for that's not true. We have to look not at religious structure, but religion is an expression of reality and an explanation of reality, in particular Orthodox Christianity as an explanation of reality. But even though Orthodox Christianity, I think, presents it the most clearly and the most accurately, I think it can also be said in large part that ancient religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, other ancient Christian forms, Judaism in ancient form. Some people will absolutely disagree with me about that, but I'm not talking about Neo-Judaism. I'm talking about Judaism prior to Christ's coming. There are Native American religions. There are all kinds of stuff that people get some pretty significant clues about what is right and what is wrong, and those standards are remarkably consistent. Okay, they're remarkably consistent, and often they can be understood as real because any faith tradition that has an ancient beginning and still continues today probably continues today because there is a strong grasp on at least part of the truth, and those things last. Those things are eternal. All right. So enough of that. So what about, well, actually not enough about that, because here we also want to talk about Franklin Graham. Franklin Graham is Billy Graham's son. Maybe most of you know, maybe some of you don't, but Billy Graham was basically the premier American evangelist in my childhood in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s. He was around for a long, long time. He was the go-to guy for many presidents. He spoke to millions of people all over the world. He was, my memory of him from when I was a kid was that he was kind of a fire and brimstone sort of fella. But later in life, his faith really deepened, and I found comments of his not long before he passed away where his view on faith was remarkably similar to that of an Orthodox Christian, in which he was just kind of like, everything it's not about me, it's about him. It's about God. And he didn't really have much else to say about it, other than, this is what it is. It's about the love of God. It's about the fact that he is who he is, and we are not. It's very simple. So his son, Franklin, took over the ministry some years ago. He was a little bit controversial because compared to his father, Franklin was a wild man, because he liked motorcycles and all that. But his message is pretty much the same as his dad's, and he was reported as saying that there is a storm coming in the United States, and his viewpoint was very interesting. The idea was that all of this woke stuff, the Target things, the Bud Light things, all the transgender attacks, and all this Pride Month, if you want, Gay Pride Month, all of this is just the prelude. And there was a report that showed this about how the U.S. government has a tiered system of organizations and individuals and companies who the government suspects or treats as though they were terrorist organizations. Among them was Fox News, apparently the Roman Catholics, like traditional Roman Catholics, people of faith, people of real, and particularly people of Christian faith, not Muslim, not Jewish, people of Christian faith who are strong in their faith, are now becoming targeted as people that must be investigated because they are dangerous and cannot be trusted because of their extreme beliefs. Well, back in the 1970s, if you compare a Christian's beliefs today to one in the 1970s, I think you would not find that where a lot of people fall now is necessarily extreme at all. Even in Orthodoxy, in the 1970s, 1960s, 1950s, there was a greater tendency to judge people for their behavior being in or outside of what was considered the good Christian norm of the time. And now we're pretty relaxed about what people do, and it seems like, if anything, a lot of folks are a little more concerned with the heart than the physicality. So, for example, like how in the 1950s when people went to church, which they often did every Sunday, they dressed up in their Sunday best because it was Sunday and you dressed up really respectfully to show yourself before God. But really, there was this thing, if you didn't do that, then everybody else would judge you for not showing up respectfully before God. It's not about God, it was about the cultural standards that had been built by everybody in that community. Well, now we've kind of, I think it's actually a good thing that in many ways we have gotten past some of that. In the Orthodox Church, we still don't want people going into church dressed in shorts or revealing clothes if they're women or even men. It is strongly traditional in Russia and some other countries that a woman goes into the temple with her head covered. But even in Russia, I see some women that don't, or that have the scarf resting around their shoulders and don't put it on their head, or they have nothing at all. And certainly Orthodox women in America, some of them are very feminist and say, you want to put something on your head, and they think them's fighting words. But they are also at the same time very dedicated to Orthodox Christianity. They don't really see any benefit of covering their heads, and nobody really makes a big deal out of it. Some of them will come to realize that it might be a good idea in their own time, and maybe for others, maybe it really isn't necessary. Maybe they have bigger fish to fry in their lives in terms of getting their lives straightened out than to worry about whether or not they've got a cloth on their head. Okay? That's my view as an Orthodox Christian, as a subdeacon. Sometimes I have to watch it. Am I concerned about form or am I concerned about substance? I'm hopefully concerned about substance. If I try to dress up in the form, on top of what I wear now, sometimes I'm wearing a black Podraznik, and if I'm vested fully, it's really, really hot. And if I'm hot and getting ready to drop down in a faint because I'm so hot, maybe it's a good idea not to have so many things on under that make me that hot if I'm going to be vested. I'm just really practical about that kind of stuff. I don't think it matters to God very much. And I don't want to scandalize anybody, but, I don't think it should really matter that much. I should serve in a way that allows me to serve. And so, I'll do the vestments, but I'll have as little on under as possible so that I don't drop in a faint because I serve in a hot climate or in a hot church. So anyway, Franklin Graham talked about a storm coming, that all of these events are precursors to a massive Christian persecution across the United States. And I think he's right. Dr. Steve Turley talks about an alternate point of view that says that the coming of the new conservative age is going to be so strong that it will prevail. And I'll say this, I think he is also right. God's ways ultimately prevail, but I don't get the sense, based on the way things have been going, that we're at the place where all of a sudden, at least right now, we're going to start seeing all these outbreaks of Christian conservatism overthrowing. It's going to be a big push, and I think that is the storm. I think that is unavoidable, and there are a few reasons for that. One, the Biden ilk, which is very anti-Christian. Please heed my thought on this. Research it for yourself, but at least know that I'm saying it. The whole idea that Biden is a devout Roman Catholic, or that Nancy Pelosi is a devout Roman Catholic, or some of these other people, because they go to church and they receive communion every Sunday. This is nonsense. Okay? Receiving communion every Sunday does not make you a devout Christian. What makes you a devout Christian is if you live like a Christian should, if you live in obedience to the laws of God and to the church. And I am not a Roman Catholic, but I know that the Roman Catholic Church does not support gay marriage. It does not support abortion. It does not support drug use. And yet, these two support all three. So why are we calling them devout? Are we calling them devout because they say they go to church and because they receive communion? That just suggests a problem. Why every single Roman Catholic bishop doesn't refuse to commune them until they do confession about their point of view on abortion or about all these other things. From a pastoral point of view, I could say, well, maybe they're making progress. We'll just keep giving them communion and maybe the Lord will bring them to their senses. Well, that's one way of looking at it, but there is another way that is also true. I'm not saying that the first way isn't, but it's the Lord bringing somebody to their senses usually means that they are insensible in the first place. But it's Biden and Pelosi and all those, they're not insensible, they're very deliberate. And so for those people, when they receive communion, this has been written about, the Lord increases their distance and increases their inability to change. So what are these people doing that are communing them? Are they carrying out a resentment of trying to destroy their souls by giving them communion? Or are they just being wimps? I suspect the answer is that they're just being wimps, because most clergy are wimps when it comes to people that have some power. And that's the sad truth. But I'm saying it as a clergy member, even though I'm a lower rank of clergy, there are a lot of people that will just, well, I've got to give him communion because he's sitting as president. I just have to do that. Well, no, you don't. In Russia, the government model here is what we call Sinfonia. Now, Sinfonia has been around for a long time, and I just want to bring a story to mention. Ivan IV, aka Ivan the Formidable or Terrible. Well, Ivan composed church music. It's pretty interesting church music too. I've heard it sung. He commissioned churches, but he was also a crazy man apparently. And so there was a fellow that was a holy fool, is what we call him, a fool for Christ. A fool for Christ is a person who really lives at such a level of dedication to God that they aren't afraid of anybody. And so this fool goes and brings Ivan a steak during, if I'm not mistaken, during Great Lent, when you're not supposed to eat meat. And Ivan is wondering, why is this holy man bringing me steak during the fast? And the holy man rebuked him and said, look, this is what you're doing. You're bloody man. You're doing all of this horrible stuff to people and killing them and all this stuff. And so, why not eat up? Because you're just, what you're doing is wrong, really wrong. And he was unafraid. And the Tsar feared that man. Now, I don't know if he changed anything, but he had he feared the fool and did not arrest him or have him put to death or anything, because he knew that this guy spoke the words of God. So we don't have a lot of those, and we need more of those. We're going to have an opportunity to create them too, because the storm is here. It's even here in Russia to some extent. We are blessed that it is not to the place where it is in the States, but one of the priests here has remarked to me that he worries about the state of the church now, because 10 or 20 years ago everything was just blossoming and blooming and growing really fast and all this, and now things seem like there's a surface level of adherence to Christianity, and that it's not really strong. And he's got a point. It is also maybe one of the things where the present military conflict seems to have an effect on some of the faithful. There is a prayer that is said every service about the preservation of Holy Rus. Before the war, there was always, in I think the years that I've been here, since at least 2015, there was always a special prayer in the Divine Liturgy for Ukraine. Well before this whole thing started, there was always a prayer for Ukraine, because Russians view the Ukrainian people as brothers and sisters, and they see them as being in a very tragic state, because they are deluded by Western baubles and flashing, fancy lights and stuff like that, money, rather than sticking to Christ. And as we see, it's worse now than it was back in 2015. Now we've got Satanists, and there was this one a mock funeral that happened last week, or in the last week, where somebody was dressed up in a helmet with Satan's satanic symbols on it, and had a real censer, and they had people dressed up in crazy, like witchcraft clothes and all this kind of stuff, and sometimes the people were howling and making animal noises and all this while they're supposedly commemorating the death of a hierarch, an Orthodox hierarch in the Kiev-Pechersky, I believe. So it's here too. It's there in Ukraine. It's on our borders here, and there are a lot of people trying to be careful about it and be aware. But the struggle is here, and there is not a little talk about the fact that the war is happening because we in Russia are not doing something right. It has nothing to do with Putin. It has more to do with things like not getting rid of Lenin's body. What I talked about when we started this little broadcast. So let's see if there's anything else we want to talk about. Funny story. Sometimes you might call this clown world, but I have been dealing with a very nasty customs issue. Hopefully it is nearing its end, but in dealing with the customs issue, one of the principal things that we run into is the absolutely fabled Russian bureaucracy. So when Yevgeny Prigozhin did a video a few days ago announcing that the city of Bakhmut, now to be known as Artyomovsk, is completely under Russian control. Yevgeny Prigozhin actually even gave credit to the Ukrainian soldiers for fighting a good fight. He thanked the Russian Ministry of Defense. He thanked General Surovikin, but he also said the Russian bureaucracy was throwing sand in my gears and doing everything possible to hinder my progress in our operations here. And so I've had a lot of problems with the bureaucracy as well. And so when I heard him say that, I couldn't resist laughing about that. So, but, you know, that was also when I thought that the bureaucracy was wrong. Then I got a little more information from an attorney that said, well, no, this is right, what's happened. But, you know, the attorney, it was interesting. After 10 months, I finally got one attorney to tell me a straight piece of information that I could actually understand. So it's interesting how long it takes to get something clarified. And for most legal matters in this country, I have to thank my wife because she is Russian and she knows how all of this stuff works. And I was telling her yesterday as we were dealing with an issue, I feel like a small boy because I don't know how to do any of this stuff, and you are doing everything for me and helping me and stuff. And she said, well, it would be the same if we were in the United States and I had to deal with something, which is, of course, true. You know, I pretty much know I know the steps to take, or at least the language to know which direction to go to ask questions for the steps I need to take in the United States, and of course I would do that. I have to say something about the Russian people. They are extraordinary people. While some of them can exhibit fantastic heartlessness, most of them are really, really wonderful. If you can imagine, you know, Moscow has 16 million people in it. But I have had more encounters with people that talk to you like a neighbor or as a friend than not. Living in the largest city I've ever been in my life, I think. Certainly the largest city I've ever lived in my life. This place is twice as many people as New York. And as much as I hate cities, I like this one. You know, good churches, good people. And I don't fancy myself a cultural person of any type. So, you know, my life is pretty simple. But, you know, it's a good place to be. There is an American colony planned to take shape outside of Moscow, as a matter of fact. They are working on a deal, I think, to get some land, I believe it's south of Moscow. And they are calling it the American Community. I think there are about 500 people, maybe it's 500 families that are looking to escape the United States in its decline and come here. A lot of them are Orthodox Christians. In fact, probably the majority of them are Orthodox Christians because they are coming here with the idea that if they are here, then they can live a life that's close to the church. Now, I will say something. It isn't that easy. The primary issue of life here is knowing the language. If you don't know the language, you can kind of get around in some of the big places like Moscow, maybe St. Petersburg to some extent. You can get by, but that's because there are other people that know English. But there are a whole lot of people here who don't know a stitch of English at all. So the language is vital. If you're thinking about coming here, start studying Russian. So we're going to close this video out. I hope that it was enjoyable, maybe useful. You know, a lot of my stuff is really commentary. It's really not news reporting. It's just commentary. But if you like it, do a like, do a subscribe, show your friends. Please comment and tell me things you want to hear. This is the third broadcast, and I think it's kind of nice to do this on a weekly basis. I am thinking about doing more, but I want to keep it to once a week for now. And perhaps maybe one of the format ideas I might do is record very brief pieces and try to stitch them together, in which case I'll be doing it from home and not out on the street, you know, so that at least you have a consistent background. Looks better for editing that way. But let's see what we have. I mean, you know, comment. Tell me what you want to know, and I will tell you what I know. And I will tell you what I don't know. So, anyway, this is Seraphim Hanish from the Durham, American in Exile, and I hope you all have a very good week. Истина воскресит. Истина воскресит.